a $750 fine plus $150 in court costs. No, that's not what CAA have fined me. I want to talk about another case from a few years ago. AC/DC drummer Phil Rudd, he lives in New Zealand and he flies an aircraft. He's got a private pilot's license. And a few years ago, CAA fined him $750 plus $150 court costs for not keeping his logbook up to date. Now, from that you can obviously infer that the Civil Aviation Authority places great emphasis on people keeping their records accurate and timely, up to date. Very important for safety to make sure everything is right from the documentation perspective. So you would expect that if CAA are going to hand out pretty harsh fines when people don't comply with that requirement, then they'd be pretty much up to scratch themselves. I'm sure they would want to lead by example. And one of my little bugbears, one of the things that really grinds my wheels is when people have this attitude, do as we say, not as we do. I believe that people in positions of power, or organisations in positions of power and authority, should lead by example, not by diktat. They should show by what they do that they believe something's important. And if accurate and up-to-date record keeping is important, one would expect CAA themselves would have accurate and up-to-date records. So let's talk about the investigation CAA undertook into my alleged infringement of the rules and the outcome of that investigation. Now, as the regular viewers will know, CAA received 3 complaints against videos I posted to YouTube that alleged I had infringed the rules, and obviously, according to CAA, that means I had endangered aviation safety, because CAA told me any non-compliant act poses a threat to aviation, and it was alleged that on 3 occasions I had breached the rules, therefore been a danger to aviation. This investigation, I was told by CAA, would take about a week. That was the expectation they set. And as you know, it's been many weeks, and I have been constantly trying to get some information out of the Civil Aviation Authority. What's going on? What's happened? Why is this taking so long? There's been very little in the way of feedback from the other direction. So I contacted the Minister of Transport. He's the politician that's in charge of CAA. He is their boss, basically. And I said, look, this isn't really good enough. They set the expectation and they have failed to deliver on that expectation. I would have expected better for my taxpayer dollar. I also pointed him to the video I posted of me flying my little Mobula 6 in the backyard FPV without an observer, and asked him to comment on how patently absurd it was that this was a breach of the regulations and therefore, according to CAA, posed a danger to aviation. What do you think, Mr. Minister? Well, interesting enough, things started happening towards the end of last week. And the first thing that happened was I got a letter from the Minister of Transport. Let's read that letter. And here it is. It says, Dear Mr. Simpson, thank you for your email dated 3rd of August 2020 regarding concerns you have with the Civil Aviation Authority, CAA. Officials, these are obviously people within the CAA, advise me that the CAA is currently investigating your deliberate rule breach, as seen in the video you linked in your email. This was the tiny whoop flight. So he has confirmed there is an investigation into that flight. As this matter is under investigation, it is not appropriate for me to comment further on the specifics of your case. While you may find your situation frustrating, I am confident that any action taken by CAA will be done so in a manner that is proportionate and consistent with its statutory obligations. Now, it doesn't say anything about safety. It says proportionate and consistent with the statutory obligations. So that means, did you break the rules or not? Has the statute, the law, been broken? That's what CAA have to do. They don't have to do anything in respect to safety. It's only about whether rules were broken. The Minister goes on to say, I do appreciate that you may perceive some Civil Aviation Rule Part 101 provisions as too restrictive or disproportionate to the risk posed by these aircraft. However, if followed by all drone users of all levels of experience in New Zealand, the rules provide for a safe aviation system and protects people and property on the ground. So what the Minister is saying is he has the ultimate confidence in the civil aviation and their ability to do their job, and he effectively also basically says, well, you've got to follow the rules, or people and property and planes will be endangered by your tiny whoop in your garden. So he is as out of touch as civil aviation themselves are. Anyway, that's important. That's very important because obviously CAA have a statutory obligation to investigate and prosecute breaches of the regulations, of which my garden flight was definitely a breach. I confessed. I even told you which rule it was, and CAA have obviously received hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints about that flight. They will have to investigate that. They will have to find me guilty of breaching the rules. Safety is not the issue. It is whether I broke the rules. The Minister has made it very clear. It's whether I broke the rules that is important. So that is something to bear in mind as we go through what I'm about to present to you, right? So there is an investigation pending where the outcome can only be that, yes, I broke the rules. Right, so what about that first investigation, or those first 3 investigations? And why had I not heard from CAA? And why is Phil Rudd's conviction for not keeping his logbook up to date even remotely relevant? Well, I received an email from CAA just hours after the Minister's letter came through. Coincidence? Coincidence that the Minister emailed me and told me he'd spoken to people in CAA, and then just hours later, I get a letter from CAA, an email. Let's read what that says. I won't put this one up on the screen because people email CAA and get me into trouble because they get outraged and upset. So I'm just going to read you what CAA said. It said, "Good evening, Mr. Simpson." It's interesting to note, this was sent at 6:30 in the evening. So obviously, CAA were not obviously, but let me assume, I will have to say this is an assumption. I have no proof of this. But I assume that the Minister has inquired of CAA what's going on. They've realised, oh, we've dropped the ball a bit here. We better burn a bit of midnight oil and sort this out. Good on you, CAA. Anyway, CAA at 6:30 in the evening sent me this email. It says, "Good evening, Mr. Simpson. I was contacted by one of my team leaders, Chris, this afternoon and advised that you have not received the warning letter that was issued and posted to you on the 30th of July 2020. The letter was sent to the address 56 Arthur Street, Tokoroa, as signature required, but Chris informed me today that you had not received it. Next week I will follow up with our facilities team to contact our postage provider in an attempt to understand where the letter was sent to, as it has not been returned to our office." Okay, and there's a bit of other stuff, not relevant. Right, so it seems that CAA sent me a letter at the end of last month. And I have to ask a few questions here. Why, in the era of a pandemic, would you send a letter to somebody that you had been quite successfully communicating with by email? Surely at a time when people are abandoning face-to-face and using virtual communications for meetings and conferences and so forth, and interviews, why would you go back to the postal system, where you're taking a physical item that will have to pass through many hands to be delivered to someone? It could be a vector for disease. We don't know. We know that the disease or that the virus survives for a certain amount of time on things. This makes no sense at all. And why would you even bother wasting money on postage? Well, I suspect that CAA's response would be, well, when we send out a warning letter, we need to know that the recipient has received it. And we do that by sending a registered letter that requires a signature. So how did that work out for them? They sent it, over 3 weeks ago, and they didn't even know it hadn't been delivered. So that registered letter thing, proof of delivery, it's not working, is it? Not in the era of the pandemic, because I very much suspect, in fact, I know that the postman now just drops things and runs, because it's the pandemic thing. There's no face-to-face. They don't want you to be signing stuff because there's a risk involved. So this registered letter thing is a complete and utter waste of money. It's ineffective. It didn't work, did it? Because I've been checking my mailbox every day expecting to get a letter from CAA, because I know how bureaucracies work and they like to use the old school techniques like writing stuff on paper. And I checked my post office box in town because I have a post office box as well. Nothing from CAA. So what has gone wrong? Why did I not get that letter? Well, the clue is in the address. And this is why I brought up the issue of Phil Rudd. Now, they sent the letter to 56 Arthur Street. And I should point out, at no stage during this investigation was I asked what my address was. They didn't ask my address, so I didn't give them an address. But they do have my post office box on their records because they have sent communications there before. And 56 Arthur Street, well, I did actually live there once, 6 years ago. 6 years ago I lived at 56 Arthur Street. So this organisation says, by way of levying very stiff fines, keeping your records accurate and up to date is critical. And then it does the opposite. Really, the hypocrisy resonates loud in my mind. This is ridiculous. They can't even be bothered fact-checking that the address they have is correct, which is a 5-second job. You go online to the electoral register. This is a database that all government departments have access to. You type in someone's name and up comes their address. And I checked, because we have an election coming up now, the address in the electoral roll for me is accurate. Totally accurate. So if they had checked the electoral roll, they would have got the correct address for me. But no, they have relied on records which are obviously 6 years out of date for something as important as sending out a registered letter. Not just an ordinary letter, but something that has to be registered because it's so important. I'm sorry, but this is atrocious. This is terrible. And I want to know, on behalf of Phil Rudd, who copped a $750 fine plus $150 court costs, how much will CAA be fined for not keeping their records accurate and up to date? Or is it just do as we say, not as we do? Yeah, it's the latter. I'm sorry. This heightens my belief that people wearing smart suits, sitting behind polished wooden desks in an office of a bureaucracy have no right telling other people what is safe and what is not. Certainly not people like myself who have 6 decades of experience and a knowledge and understanding of what they're doing, a commitment to safety. How can you possibly say, you know better than me? You know better, you can't even get my address right. How can you possibly understand what happens when I fly my models and my drones and I take into account all the various factors and I have a radio with me and I can hear if anything's coming and I have an observer? How can you possibly say that what I'm doing is, you know it's unsafe? How do you know? You don't even know where I live and you can't be bothered checking. This is terrible. I said that CAA would have egg on their face. Could it get worse than this for them? Really, seriously. Do as we say, not as we do. Not good enough. Not good enough at all. But wait, it gets better. It gets better. Let's read the warning letter that I got from CAA. Let's have a look and see what it says. It says, Dear Mr. Simpson, warning letter, remotely piloted aircraft. Remember, CAA doesn't draw a distinction between model aircraft and drones, which was a surprise to them because the investigator who investigated these complaints was unaware that model aircraft and drones were subject to exactly the same rules. So I had to educate him about the rules, which kind of seemed rather strange at the time that the investigator investigating me for breaches didn't know the rules. But hey, you know, I'm just someone with 60 years of experience and a very deep knowledge of what I'm doing. He's the investigator. Anyway, it says, the CAA has now completed its enforcement investigation of the allegation that you operated a remotely piloted aircraft, 1, on or about the 5th of March 2020 at the Tokoroa Aerodrome without the aerodrome operator's agreement, and they refer to the rule. 2, on or about the 15th of March 2020 from Lake Moananui, Tokoroa, using a first-person view goggles without an observer and within 4 kilometres of the Tokoroa heliport without approval from the heliport operator, and they refer to the rules. And 3, on or about the 19th of April 2020 from 56 Arthur Street, Tokoroa, using first-person view goggles without an observer. Right, let's take a look at this. Now, remember this address, 56 Arthur Street. Now, seriously, what they're saying is that I operated a drone from 56 Arthur Street and they were investigating that. Well, how can you investigate it when the very basic premise of the fact is wrong? This was during the lockdown we had here. I had to be stuck at my own home, which is not 56 Arthur Street anymore. So how can you possibly investigate a flight from 56 Arthur Street when I couldn't legally be there and I wasn't there? And I can prove I wasn't there because let's take a look at that flight. And well, first of all, let's take a look at where 56 Arthur Street is, shall we? So here is Google Earth. And here is the area where the drone flight took place. And you can see that. So let's type in 56 Arthur Street and see where we end up. Am I typing this correctly? No cursors in the way. Let's have a look. Where do we go? From there to, oh, this is quite a distance, isn't it? It's quite a, oh, look, oh. So the investigator must surely have looked on Google Earth to see where 56 Arthur Street was, to get a context for the flight. And if we just pull out of here a bit, let's just pull out. We can see there is a long way. It's a long way from 56 Arthur Street to the lake area where I was allegedly flying. See all that distance there? Let's measure it. Google Earth has some wonderful tools. Let's go to the ruler. Let's see how far that was. We'll go from 56 Arthur Street down to the area where the flights allegedly took place. It's 1.15 miles, or if you're a kilometre person, let's go to kilometres. 1.86 kilometres, over a mile, almost 2 kilometres from 56 Arthur Street is where the flight supposedly took place. Yes, now remember we're dealing with sub 250 gram craft here with tiny batteries, 650 milliampere hour batteries. And just to make sure, let's take a look at the footage that was shot, that video, or the video that was being complained about. Let's have a look at that video. So let's see if we could have taken this video from 56 Arthur Street. Here we go, we take off from the deck and you can see the lake immediately. Does that look nearly 2 kilometres away, that lake? It does not. It does not look nearly 2 kilometres away. So, did the investigator even investigate? Surely he would have done the basics and seen that this flight could not have taken place from 56 Arthur Street. I really don't think this investigation was conducted at all well. I think it was conducted with information that was completely wrong, such as the address from which the flight took place. And so let's look at the conclusions though. What the rest of this letter? What else does it say? It says here, and the CAA has determined there is sufficient evidence to prove an offence against CAR 101.205A1I in relation to the Tokoroa Hospital heliport. However, after consideration of the CAA enforcement policy and the circumstances of the case, the CAA has decided to issue you with this warning letter. Very important, remember that, warning letter. And it says, please be advised that this outcome will be considered should you come to the attention of the CAA again. I expect you to take account of this warning letter and in future to comply with your obligations under the civil aviation legislation and rules. Now, I don't agree with the outcome of that investigation. I think I was totally compliant in every regard. I've got communications with the hospital operator to show there was an arrangement in place and there was an observer there, and the flight was conducted totally safely. It was complete safety. The fact that they use very large helicopters, the Kawasaki helicopter is incredibly loud. Even if a helicopter had come along my observer and I would have heard it from a long way away. Helicopters of this scale are they move a lot of air. They're very noisy. They blew my damn fence down when they hovered over the house. That's how big and noisy they are. I refute the claims that this was in any way an unsafe operation, which is the implication if they say that I'd breached the rules. But they have decided from their shiny desks in an office hundreds of kilometres away that I was flying unsafely. That's what they have decided here, despite the fact they can't even get my damn address right. Despite the fact that they don't follow the same diktats that they make for others in terms of record keeping. But anyway, so the important thing is I got a warning letter. And if we look at the way that CAA deals with people that come to their attention in complaints and so forth, the first thing they do is educate people. They have this policy that they've published which says, in the first instance, we will educate people. If you've done something wrong, we'll educate you, let you know what you've done wrong, tell you what you should have done, and invite you to research the rules and get more familiar with your responsibilities and obligations. And that's a damn good, I've got to say, I'm not here just to bash CAA. That's a very good approach. That should always be the first approach. A lot of people, if they do something wrong, it's done out of ignorance or naivety. They didn't know. Gosh, I didn't know I couldn't fly above 120 meters legally and whatever it is, and they will adjust their ways. 99% of people, when educated, will change their attitudes and change their direction and do the right thing. You know, it's what people do. Most people are pretty good folk, you know. I include myself in that. Maybe I'm a little big-headed, but yeah, I like to think I do the right thing when it's appropriate and it's necessary, right? So that's the thing. Education is the first step on their enforcement policy. Now, if you've been educated previously and you come to their attention again, you get a warning letter. Now, interestingly enough, I got a warning letter straight off. I didn't get the education. Why would that be? Is it because I had to educate CAA themselves as to their rules? It would be a bit embarrassing to try and educate someone that appears to know more than you about the rules relating to model aircraft and drones. So they obviously had to skip the education. How embarrassing. They had to skip the education step in this case and go straight to the warning letter. Straight to the warning letter. There's someone in the suit behind the shiny desk in Wellington. Oh, goodness me. Let's send this guy a warning letter. And that's what they did. So I'm happy with that. That's what I figured would happen. I was pretty sure I'd get a warning letter over this because they really don't want to take it to court because they don't want precedents set that might upset future cases. And as you know, I wouldn't go to court. I wouldn't lie down and take it. I'd take it to court and would be talking to a judge. So what happens now? What happens now? Well, they did say if I come to the attention of CAA again, then this warning will be taken into account. So I've been warned. And the next step on the 3-tier of enforcement is prosecution. Prosecution, penalty. So now we still have 2 investigations active against me within CAA. One of them is the SD card I found in the park, which is not me, of course, but it's and Doug has informed me that was danger aviation because it was a non-compliant act. So whoever did it, they'd be in trouble. And then there is the really egregious one. When I flew my Mobula 6 in the garden, FPV, no spotter. Oh my goodness. Egregious breach of regulations. I admitted to it, and I understand that CAA has received hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints about that, or about that particular outrageous contempt for the regulations. So they have no option. According to the minister himself, they're going to have to check to make sure the statutes were not broken, the regulations not broken, but they were broken. And I openly admit I broke the damn rules on purpose by flying my tiny little drone in the garden. So CAA are going to have to look at that. They're going to have to take me to court now, aren't they? They're going to have to prosecute me for flying my tiny toy in the garden. And one could say this was a very cunning plan, Mr. Simpson. You mapped this all out. And I'd have to say, yes, I did. This is exactly what I expected would happen, and we're headed exactly down the path that I have laid out. Because I want to stand in front of a judge and say, excuse me, Your Honour, this is the craft that was endangering aviation safety, allegedly. I would like you to have CAA explain why they're wasting taxpayers' money bringing this before the court. What the hell is going on? Surely, given the number of people that die every year in manned aviation incidents in this country, they have much better things to do than to bring a 67-year-old man like myself before the court, wasting taxpayers' money and court time to try and prosecute me for this. Who's next? A 5-year-old at Christmas? A 6-year-old at Christmas? Who's next is going to be hauled before the courts unreasonably simply because a woefully outdated rule has been broken? And by the way, Your Honour, if we were living in Canada, I wouldn't be here. If we were in Australia, I wouldn't be here. But we're in New Zealand, where we've got rules that are over 5 years out of date, and the court's time is being wasted. So here we go. So we're headed down that path. CAA have to live by their policy. This is what happens. Bureaucracies have policies. Now, if you're not aware of how policies work, bureaucrats often not the sharpest knives in the drawer. Now, to say there are exceptions, I know some very, very sharp bureaucrats, some very smart people in the bureaucracies, and they work very well and do their job excellently. But a lot of bureaucrats, not that sharp. So they have to cater for the lowest common denominator, which means you can't just say to a bureaucrat, do this. You've got to show them how to do it. You've got to give them a step-by-step, lay it all out. And that's the policy. So CAA has this policy, the 3-tier policy for enforcement, educate, warn, and prosecute or penalise. And so now they're going to have to penalise me. The policy says so. You can't not follow the policy, because if you do, you put your neck on the line. Policies are there, like most rules within bureaucracies, to cover your ass. If something bad happens, you can turn around and say, I was just following policies, not my fault. And they go, oh, fair enough. And you get out of jail free card. If you step outside the policy, if you don't follow the policy, your neck's on the line, and you can get a hammering. If you do something wrong and it's not policy, you're out. Right? So bureaucrats always follow the policy, and the policy says Mr. Simpson must be penalised, must be prosecuted, must be taken to court for his egregious act of contempt for the regulations. So my day in court will be coming, and I will be so looking forward to it. And in the meantime, I'm still flying safely. And if CAA wants to waste their time, if they want to waste taxpayers' money, if they want to waste the court's time and risk angering the court for bringing frivolous prosecutions, let's see what happens. I would just like to be able to fly safely and comply with the regulations where it's essential for safety and get on with what I do and preach the safety sermon to those who are listening. CAA, a little bit fixated on compliance, even though their own compliance is very poor. 56 Arthur Street, 6 years out of date. Phil Rudd, I'd ask for your money back, mate. I really would. And that's it. That's my little video on this. There may be some more to come. But so far, that's the update. And I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters. You make it possible for me to rally against the stupidity of bureaucracies where it occurs and to stand up for the damn hobby, which is what I'm doing. In the meantime, I've got lots more work to do. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.